Packard Jazz.
Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Jazz.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to do it.
You know, I think I've talked with almost everyone you've played with, almost, but like with so many people. And, I've listened to your music for such a long time, and being a musician and composer myself, following your concepts and compositions. And I'll just jump in. And
Sure.
I want to start with 4 experiments. And like I have so many albums of yours, and I think every project you do has like a conceptual, compositional, kind of like a story or an background. And I wanted to ask you, like, how do you decide where to go for a project, and what's the story behind 4 experiments? Actually, I mean, how did you decide to do this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times projects just come up because I'm trying to be a better improviser. So, a lot of compositional ideas start with me trying to figure out a way to kind of maybe push myself out of some habits, or to see if I can play in a different way, or if I can interact with other humans a different way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so most things have come out of that, maybe with the exception of, no, I was going to say maybe with the exception of Columbia Icefield, but that kind of came out of a different thing too. 4 experiments really started during the pandemic, because all of a sudden I had all this time. My day job had already moved to us all working from home anyway, so that wasn't a huge change, but no gigs, no touring. I was just practicing a ton. And that's always this question of like, how do you practice improvisation is a really tricky thing. So I was thinking about that kind of stuff and trying to make little experiments for myself, things that I could do every day that would make me either approach my instrument or certain aspects of improvising, or certain aspects of like playing written music, because I was playing more written music at that point, in a way that was totally different, that maybe would have been like allowed me to just view things in a different way and like give me more options as an improviser. So I started writing them down, and around the same time I just started getting requests from people for compositions. So like a trio from Berlin, not from Berlin, but from Cologne, asked for a piece, and I just finished kind of putting together this experiment, and I thought, oh, that actually will work for them. So that sort of thing made it feel like, oh, well, maybe this would be interesting to hear other people do this. It's not just for me. And so that's kind of where it started. And then was starting to think more about how mutual aid music could expand. And it was kind of like, well, I can ask these players to do this stuff and just see what comes of it, because they're all coming from a completely different historical place than I am. And so like, let's just see what happens. And then I was super lucky, basically I brought everybody into a studio for a couple of days, and they really actually spent time with the music and took it seriously and came up with these really surprising different ways of playing it. So I got super lucky basically with it.
I wanted to ask you, like, how do you actually, I mean, approach practicing improvisation? I mean, what do you do at home?
I mean, I'm a person that overstructures everything. That's kind of the way I am. So I really think of the year in seasons, kind of like a farmer. So like every 3 months, I really just settle into one thing that I work on. And I will just try and figure out ways to deal with that one thing. Like right now, I'm not very happy with the way I play over time. I've spent so much time freely improvising that when I get in a situation when time is there, I don't feel super comfortable just laying into it anymore.
Really interesting.
So playing like melodies in time and adjusting melodies in time is like became a thing. So the last 3 months I've just been transcribing little bits from whatever CD happens to be in there when I'm thinking of it.
Oh wow.
And then just playing it in time and then just slowly metamorphizing it in time so that until I can just feel comfortable playing. And it makes me play stuff that I'm not used to playing. And the thing for me is like with practicing improvisation, and I learned this from Joe Morris. We were talking once in his car. It's like the only thing I think you can do to practice improvisation is to just work on the skills that you want to have when you get there. I'm not a huge believer in just blowing all day. Maybe that's a trumpet player thing too. Like it's just like you only have so much that you can do in a day. So it's like I want to be really structured in how I do it. But I can build that skill of playing in time and working with different melodies. And then when I go to improvise, I don't think about that at all. But I do notice, like I played a gig the other day where time kicked in and I felt way more comfortable. And I was playing things that I was hearing as opposed to just dealing with muscle memory. So it's like, it's tricky. Other times it's way more abstract. You know, like this is the most jazz-oriented practicing I've done for improvisation in years. And it's just because I got caught in a couple situations where Luke Stewart was kicking my ass, you know, playing it. I was like, oh, I want to be able to do that. I used to be a lot better at that. I need to get back and like figure out, you know, so it's a thing where you're critical, you understand, you play and you go, oh, that felt weird. I should figure out a way to practice that. I kind of dig that. Like, I like that. It's fun to figure out that problem. Like, how do I work on that? You know?
Yeah. How do you stay fresh? I mean, like, if you're touring, I mean, I encounter that problem myself sometimes, you know, that you play 10 gigs in a row, and I feel, I don't know, maybe it's just my problem, but like, that, you know, like on the fifth gig, I kind of, in my head, it's all in my head, like, I feel like I'm repeating myself, or I'm like, going the same repertoire. Do you have these thoughts, or like,
yeah, definitely. And it's tricky. It's like, I had a tour like that recently with a really great band, and we were playing free every night. So it wasn't even dealing with like charts. We really could have gone anywhere, but we played 10 gigs in 9 days kind of thing. And about halfway through, I think everybody hit that wall. It was just like, yeah, and here's the part where Nate does this, and here's the part where
I'm relieved now. Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I felt it, and I started to just think, part of the thing I did was to just listen to something, make a point of listening to something really outside of what we were doing every day. So, you know, hotel room, right when I'd get up, maybe I'd listen to like Laurie Spiegel, or the next day I would listen to like Palestrina or the Hard Noise or something, and just try and keep that sound in my head to see if it would change where we go. I think other guys did it in different ways, you know, like, I'm not going to warm up today. I'm going to like let the stiffness of not warming up kind of see if it shakes me out of stuff. And really we had 1 or 2 gigs that felt a little stale, and then people started to kind of come out of it. But it depends. I did one tour years ago it was the very first tour with Paul Litton duo. And we played this really nice gig, first gig. And then we got in the car the next morning to go to the next gig. And he was like, okay, so that was a great gig. We've got 8 more. We can't play anything we played last night tonight. Like, and it was really hard, but it was kind of great to just get my butt kicked that way, you know, because he could do it. He's got 30 years more experience. You know, but I really kind of got hammered on it, and it was great. And I realized also during that when you do try and stay fresh, you know, because it could be easy. You're exhausted, you're on the road, you're not
Yeah,
eating well, you're not eating well. Could be easy to just be like, listen, I know what these people want to hear, you know, I'm just going to do that thing and then go back to the hotel. But I'm way happier at the end of a tour even if a couple gigs I fall flat on my face trying something.
True.
I feel better about the whole thing when I'm flying home, you know.
Yeah, you could go to your licks and, you know, people who saw it yesterday and today it's different audience.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
but it's
no one will
about
know.
you, you know, it's about you. Like that's so important. It's
Definitely.
Yeah, I had the same like with Tony Malaby years ago. We were on tour and we played the first gig, the same experience. And it was a burning gig audience, you know, encores. And we played the second gig and, you know, we play a tune, really easy melody. And I kind of go in the same zone as the previous gig, right? Because it was so cool. And Malaby was just like, closed his eyes, didn't play. I was like, shit, what am I doing wrong? You know, I'm playing and struggling there, like recreating that zone. He didn't even play like the whole piece. I was like, fuck, you know, and then I asked him, he told me the same thing, you know, like shit, it's a different audience, different vibe. I feel different and I don't want to go there again. So
it's great. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons that we do this, you know. I mean, it's the difference between doing this and playing in a repertory orchestra, where you know, you're supposed to recreate something historically. Like this is the excitement, and you would think that the audience wants to hear that. Like that's the reason they show up, is to be surprised. So hopefully you can surprise yourself and your bandmates and them all at once.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned mutual aid music before, and you know, it's something that I love that one. I mean, I love the group, the players, the musicians, they're incredible. But also your concepts, I've read it so many times. You know, what was the story there? And it's funny because, you know, you mentioned those points of what a musician should do. And in a way, they're like self-explanatory, you know, play only what you think contributes to make the group sound better and stuff like that. And which many times we just forget. In a way, but like why did you decide for that project? I mean, what was the story there?
I mean, that really came out of this band Battle Pieces, which the original idea of that was, can I write music that puts limits on jazz players so that they just can't really develop, they can't like go into their licks. And you know, this is more for me than anybody else. And so that was great. We did that for years with Ingrid and Sylvie and Matt. But it's still, what that started becoming was like a chance for everybody to play solo improvisations, and then people would kind of back them up using the material, which was cool. It still, I thought, was a really solid musical project. But my own listening kind of started to veer more towards contemporary classical music, and I started to hear things in a different way, and I started to want to hear music in a different way. Like I instead of hearing kind of the hierarchy of soloists and background, or even like melody, counterpoint, you know, whatever, harmony, I wanted to hear this music that was kind of amoebic, where you couldn't really tell who's doing what when, and it allowed you to kind of put your attention on one player for a minute and then switch to another. And it wasn't necessarily intended to have an arc like we typically do in jazz music or free jazz. It's like, it's not building to anything, it's just existing, and it has all these surprising shapes. That's like what I heard in my head. I was like, how do you do that? And so the mutual aid thing was really just taking the Battle Pieces concept and changing the way that I explained it to the players. So instead of it being like, Ingrid Laubrock is the soloist here, and we're going to use this material to support what she wants to do, it became Ingrid is the soloist, and that means she has the most responsibility, because everybody else will be dealing with this music and trying to make a piece out of it. and she's the one that has to like stitch everything together. So it really became no one was allowed to solo, but you really had to think twice before you
jump in.
became a soloist. You know, like there definitely were points, and there are points on that record where it's just like you hear someone coming out and soloing, but it's the thing that actually makes the most sense in that music. Like it needs a soloist at that point. So they do. And it's like, oh, okay. And I just 2 days ago gave a talk up at Princeton about composition, and we were working on that stuff. And I played Cory Smythe's piece from that record. And someone brought something up which I never thought about, which is he takes its big solo in the middle of it. Like it's just him, but he chooses to play his solo like it's an Elliott Carter piece. So you would, if you didn't know who he was or what the piece was, you would just hear it as this like late 20th century classical piece. And that was him like making a choice because everybody kind of dropped out and he's by himself. And he's like, okay, I could freak out and make this about me, or I could just stitch the whole world together. I mean, it was a beautiful choice. And someone had to point it out to me. And it's like, he made that choice to do the thing. So it's just getting everybody to think beyond I'm the piano player, so I comp until it's my turn to solo. I'm the drummer, so I'm the trumpet player, so I'm always the melody. Like getting that out of that thing to just do it. And now as the band has progressed and we're playing every month and the music has like loosened up a lot, it really has hit that place where it is the amorphous thing that I'd always wanted it to be. You know, like if 8 of us are playing, you might hear 3 different groupings of people listening across the band and dealing with each other. And, you know, it's really become something special, I think.
Are you gonna record again with this group now? Like after this kind of?
I hope to. The plan was we did a concert at Roulette, and it was a beautiful concert. And unfortunately, the recording got screwed up, so we can't use it. So the plan was to just release that because I think that band live is what makes a lot of sense. Now I kind of have to rethink how we're going to do it. I think everything we've done at Sisters has been recorded. So if I can get those tracks clean enough, it might actually just make sense to do the release files of like the whole year so that people can hear how it develops.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
It would be really great, but we'll have to see if it works out, you know. Yeah.
No, it's a great, I love this concept because it's like you said, eliminating the ego also in music. And you know, it's hopefully like team play. It's like a basketball team, like someone takes over, and I like that.
Yeah. No, and it's a kind of a non-confrontational way to deal with that too. You know, it's not like the John Cage making a proclamation that he's taken himself out of the music, or it's just kind of like sometimes the ego wins and someone takes off on a solo and everybody in the band's like, well, okay, here's where we are, and that's cool, and they need to do it, and we find a way to make it work, and yet it somehow also doesn't turn into a free jazz thing. Like that's the other important thing is like, not that I love free jazz, but I don't want that music to become something where people can just rely on their muscle memory to freak out. So I want everybody to be super conscious of what they're doing, you know, with that music. So
no, it's important. I mean, pushing the boundaries, and I think it's important. I mean, I get sick many times of music on a live concert when it's just like you said, you know, melody, solo 1, solo 2, even if it's like quite progressive in a sense. You know, on third tune, you're like, okay, it's great players and everything, but like, okay, I don't know.
Well, and when you're playing that, like it gets old, you know.
So it's cool what you do, and I mean, I love that. So. Thanks. But I wanted to ask you, you know, you said before that you practicing playing in time, and but if we just go back, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s, who were the players you started to investigate, or how did you get into improv and jazz actually? I mean, what was the main trigger?
I mean, I grew up in jazz. So my dad is a big band sax player, And so I really grew up listening to jazz. Like jazz was in the house. I don't remember learning how to read chord changes. Like he taught me so young what they meant and how to deal with them that I actually have no memory. I just have always known how to read them. So it's like a crazy early education.
Oh.
And so the thing that was really big for me was like I started to play with my dad's band when I was 12.
Oh, wow.
And so that education was super important because it was all dudes from the Woody Herman band, Stan Kenton, and my dad had played a little bit with Basie. And so there was all this like different information coming at me from different ways. And none of them had like a technical education in jazz. They just had been on the road forever and knew how to do it. And so early on, it was like swing players for sure. I was a huge Harry James fan, Charlie Shavers. Those were like my first heroes. And then on my 13th or 14th birthday, my dad bought me a record player and gave me $50 and took me to the record store in Portland, Oregon, near where I grew up. And he was like, here you go. And, you know, this is like 1987, 86, 87. So like you could buy a jazz record for $2, you know, at this place. So I bought a bunch of records and that was huge. But even more important, the guy who owned the store, every time I would go buy records there, you know, I'd buy like 10 records that I was into. And then he would just like split for a minute and come back and then slide 2 other records into the bottom of the pile.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Just like, yeah, take these. And it was always one step ahead of where I was. So it was like, I'd go in and buy a bunch of like Roy Eldridge records the first time, and he would slip like some Dizzy Gillespie in there. You know, and next time he'd see that I was buying Dizzy Gillespie records, and he'd put some Miles Davis in there. You know, it's like he knew my dad was a pretty conservative jazz player, and by the end, you know, he was like putting Ornette records and Late Coltrane, and that was like I was getting that stuff at age 15. And that was really huge. But like trumpet player wise, definitely 60s Miles was huge. Like that felt like punk rock to me. Hearing 4 and More was just like, what? That energy. Because I had no experience with rock or any, like I really had just heard jazz. And so he was huge. And Booker Little was like, oh man, the absolute thing for me. The second I heard him, like I found everything I could and transcribed everything I could and like just anything. And then, you know, so that was like high school. And then later it was more like the Freddie Hubbard, Woody Shaw, like who you would expect kind of a young kid to want to, you know, that kind of
usual suspects kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And then in college I discovered quite by accident Ron Miles, and that changed everything. Like then everything took a left turn, and I think everything that came after that was in like because of Ron, you know, of finding him. So
yeah, I wanted to ask you about Ron. I mean, I know on Argonautica, I love that record, by the way. And but even before, you know, he's one of the greatest, you know, out there. Was, I mean, unfortunately, but what was the lessons you learned with him? And I mean,
you know, it's funny, and I've told this story a couple times, but I met Ron because I was playing at University of Oregon. Wow, sorry, there's guys putting a ladder against our house. Okay, sorry, I was not expecting that. I was playing at University of Oregon. This guy came from Denver to play with us, and he was like, "You sound like Ron Miles." And I had a girlfriend that had given me the record Witness as a gift because she thought it was Miles Davis. And so I don't know how she found it, but it was like this weird thing. And so he gave me Ron's number. I called him. He was such a sweet dude. So he was coming to the West Coast a lot to play with Frizzell. And every time he would come, I just would follow the band. And like during the day, I'd hang out with Ron, and then he would get me into the concert. And we never had a proper lesson. during that time. Like we would play together. He would talk about what he's listening to. I'd talk about what I'm listening to. And then we became friends over that time. And when I got out of University of Oregon, I really only planned to go to Eastman. It was the only thing I knew at that point was like, you're supposed to go to Eastman. And I didn't get in. They were like, the jazz department said no. So Ron called me out of the blue. I think he found that out because Shane Ensley was going there and knew both of us. And so he called and he said, what's going on? What are you up to? And I said, I didn't get in. What's your plan? I'm going to move with my girlfriend to San Francisco and become the manager of her uncle's apartment building. And he's like, okay, let me call you back in 15 minutes. So he calls me back and he says, listen, I got you an audition here in Denver at a school. You still have to pass the audition, but like, I think you will. And if you come here, I don't teach at that school, but if you come here, you can have as many lessons with me as you want the entire time. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Did the audition, totally fine, got in, moved my stuff. Literally the day I drove in, threw all my stuff in my apartment and drove straight to Ron's place for a lesson. And we sat down for 2 hours and he like showed me some lip slurs and a couple like technical things. And then he was like, that's it. That's all I have to teach you. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah, no more lessons. That's the only lesson you get. And I was like, but, I was totally confused. And he goes, yeah, I just thought you were going to quit playing if you moved to San Francisco. So I kind of tricked you.
Wow.
You and I can hang out whenever you want. And he's like, come over, we'll play duets, we'll listen to records. Wow. And I did, like for the 3 or 4 years that I lived there, I would just go. He lived near where the music school was. So like, I just call him and say, are you home? He's like, yeah. And I come over and we play Arbin's duets or like improvise together. Or we'd listen to Red or like, whatever he was into. And it was great. And I don't know that I learned anything specific from him, but I learned a ton just watching him and how he treated other people and how he like was a musician in the world, and that was massive. I feel like I got so much from him that maybe a regular student wouldn't have, just in being able to see him. He was a special person in the world, whether he had been anything else or a trumpet player. Like just being around him was really important to me.
That's amazing. Well, that's amazing. That's quite lucky, actually, you got, in a sense.
That's
quite amazing.
Sure. I feel very lucky to have gotten to know him.
Yeah, he's really one of the quite more underrated players actually in jazz.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, the musicians us know him, but widely, I mean, through Frizzell he's kind of known, but you know what I mean. It's like a great composer and player and everything.
No, I mean, really, like those records on Gramavision are radical, super innovative records that no one knows, which is a bummer.
Well, we spread the word, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone then Googles or whatever. So
hopefully.
Yeah. Did Ron encourage you to move to New York, or how did you decide and when, like, to do that?
He never encouraged me to move to New York. He hated New York, as far as I understood. He did live here for a while, and I think it wasn't a good experience for him. I mean, he was such a gentle person. I think it was probably a hard place, but he went to school, I think, at Manhattan or Manus. I can't remember which one. So he was never anti-New York, but he was never saying, oh man, you got to move to New York. What happened was actually a Tony Malaby story. I went to Banff, and Tony and Angie were teaching there, and Angelica Sanchez and Dave Blue. And they were just kind of they weren't the big names at that point there, like Lavana was there and Joey Barron and stuff. But I gravitated towards them because they were doing really interesting playing. And not long after I came back to Denver, I just got a call from Tony saying like, we're moving, our apartment's opening up, it's super cheap in Jersey City, you should move. So, I mean, I'm sure he only told me that because he wanted someone to take the apartment, but like, it worked. It was great. So my wife and I saved up money in Denver for like 6 months and moved out here. And, you know, it was great. But then once I told Ron, I was like, I'm going to move to New York. He was like, yeah, it's time for you to do that. You've done what is possible now in Denver. You know, he wasn't really playing any gigs in Denver at that point. And he's just like, go do this thing, see what you can do. And then he was super supportive, you know. I'd get texts from him all the time, like, just heard such and such record, or, you know, watch the live stream of Roulette and, you know, checking it out. So he was positive about it, but I don't think, what I remember, like even in the Argonautica gigs, he was pretty excited to leave New York.
Interesting.
Wow. Like, I don't need to be here. I don't need an extra day. You know, it's like fly in, do the thing, fly out, go back home, you know, where it's peaceful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild there. Yeah.
I can understand that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you came to New York, was it difficult for you? I mean, now you're a mainstay of the improvised scene. I think you played like with almost everyone, and but in the beginning, did you know anyone in the city? I mean, like, or what were the first contacts?
There were some guys I knew from Banff.
Oh, yeah.
So I was able to get some stuff going pretty quickly. So right when I moved, I was playing mostly with guys that were going to NYU, and a lot of them aren't around the city anymore, but the one that still is playing around is Dave Troit. I played with Dave a lot. You know, and I was playing a lot of sessions with Malaby, because he still lived on my, you know, he's just 2 doors down. So doing that kind of stuff, and meeting players through them, and you know, like that's where I met Chris Davis and you know, Jeff Davis I knew, who was her former partner, I knew from Denver. So like there were little pockets of things, and I remember thinking now, like these weird sessions that when I think back on them were kind of insane, like going up to Jeff and Chris Davis's apartment, and they're like, yeah, just come over and play a session. And then it was like Thomas Morgan and John Arabigon, you know, but we're all just like little kids, you know, doing this thing. And it's the same of, you know, early bands. I started playing a lot with Mike Pride early on.
Yeah.
He was like much more established when I came. He'd been here a little longer, and that's where I met like Mary Halvorson and Ruben Radding and the people that, and from there it kind of progressed. But the big thing was Asif Sahar had an orchestra when I moved here, and it was like 30 people, and he was doing conduction, kind of like Butch Morris stuff.
Yeah.
And I met him at a restaurant I was working in, and he never heard me play, but you know, the band was so big, he was just like, yeah, come play this gig. And that, I met everybody at that gig. I mean, that was like, it was me, and it was Mary and Jessica Pavone and Okyung Lee, and you know, it was just like all these folks, Daniel Carter, and I met so many people just playing those gigs. And without that, it probably would have taken me another 3 years to start really playing in the city. But that was just like accelerated, you know, it was great.
Did you start leading bands immediately also? Like when you moved, or?
Yeah, I had a quartet kind of right away that didn't do much. And then I stopped doing that. I kind of had like a little bit of a musical crisis about jazz. I kind of hit a wall with partially what I felt I could do in modern jazz, and just listening to it, I think probably just burnt out on it. So I didn't do anything except for like solo trumpet stuff for a while.
Hmm.
And then I had another quartet that was moving into more of the direction I'm in now. And the drummer unfortunately committed suicide. So that kind of went away. But then out of that, finally the quintet that was kind of like a couple missed attempts at the quintet. And finally the quintet was the band that stuck. And I had a better idea of what I wanted to do and pick the right players at the right time, I think. And that's when that was like the first real band that was, me doing something.
Hmm. Did you immediately feel comfortable as leading a band? I mean, like that's role. I mean, now you're kind of like researching this area of you've gathered the people, and it's more like you're like everyone is equal in a sense, but like still the leader is like. What was it in the beginning like for you?
I felt uncomfortable pretty immediately with the idea of it being the Nate Wooley quintet. I still, my parents are that kind of proud parent where they have posters all over the place in the house, and I always cringe because I just hate. It's hard for me to see that, but it was a good experience. I learned a ton, and luckily, everybody in that band had led bands, and they were all very sweet about it. Like I would do a rehearsal or something, and then someone would come up and afterward and be like, it's kind of customary to do this and this and this. And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't know. Not a problem. Like very sweet. It could have been, how dare you kind of stuff. And they hung in, and the crazier I got, the crazier they got with me in a good way. Like when I brought in the idea to do the Wynton Marsalis stuff, I was like, a bunch of dudes could walk out because this seems on paper like it's a horrible idea. But if I explain what I want to do in the right way, because I had a really cogent thought about what I wanted to do, then maybe, I lose half of them and I've, whatever, we'll see. And they all were just like, great, cool, and then I'd start getting texts like, I just checked out this record, or have you ever read this interview? And it's like, they got deep into it and into it in the way I wanted, which was like, how can I play this music without sounding like the Marsalises, And I'm super thankful for the years that we had together as that band, because it was just, they were down for anything really. And it was that I'm realizing, and I'm sure to a certain extent too, like that's the hardest thing. It's finding the right people that will stay with you for a long period of time and try to do stuff.
Yeah, that's how you learn as well. I mean, us as musicians, I mean, absolutely, you can try stuff, and it's about trust in the end again. So I think that's But Nate, how did you? I wanted to ask you about. I checked my records with you, and I mean, I love collecting CDs, so I'm quite obsessed with that. So I have you in so many albums, and I noticed I have quite some, with Ken Vandermark and yourself. Like, how did your story with Ken begin? And you seem to have like a beautiful musical relationship. How did that start?
Ken is a really good friend of mine. I mean, I'm really happy about our friendship, and I'm happy that we get to play so much music together, but I also just genuinely like hanging out with him. I learn a ton. We met through Paul Litton, because Paul had already played with Ken, and I was playing duo with Ken, and I think there was a festival in Montreal where all of us were playing. I think the X put together a festival, and somehow we all got invited. And Paul just suggested that we play, instead of playing duo, we play with Ken. And it was fun. And I was like, that's cool. He seemed like a nice guy, but it really was like, we're playing this gig, and then Ken went that way and I went that way, and we didn't talk. And then a couple months later, he was doing a soundtrack for this record about Chicago. And it was supposed to be all Chicago musicians. Like Steve Albini was on it, and like, it was really heavy record. And the trumpet player that was supposed to play bailed at the last minute for still don't know why, but so Ken just called me and he's like, can you come do this? And it was really just like, I just need you to play some parts and maybe do a little improvising, and I just want you to come do it. So I was like, great. And that ended up being like 3 or 4 days of me crashing at his place doing this recording. And then we became really good friends, like during that time, because we had a lot of the same interests. You know, we were reading the same books, listening to the same music. And so from there, we really were just, he was like, let's put together a band. And we tried a couple different combinations and it never quite worked. And then finally he just was like, let's just play duo.
Yeah.
And really from the very first time that we started playing duo, it was just like immediate. And it's still that way. Like we just we played this thing for John Corbett's birthday, and it was like, you know, heavy. Joe McPhee, Roscoe Mitchell, Adashevitz, Mats Gustav, and Ken and I was like, and it was great to play with everybody, but when I played with Ken, it was just like immediately fire. It's just like there's so much togetherness, and we've played together for so long that no matter what we do, it always feels comfortable, but it always feels surprising, you know. So
That's great, yeah.
I like playing with him, you know, and so we try and figure out ways to keep the duo going. It gets harder and harder with schedules, and like it's harder to book, and bands that have been around for a while are somehow harder to book than ones that are new, and you know, so it's
interesting.
But we both seem committed to somehow keeping that going, and at least getting a chance to hang out and play.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I love the interaction you guys have, you know, either the duo or with Sylvie and Tom, that record. And
yeah, I love that.
That's a beautiful one. I mean,
yeah, it's so much fun.
Oh man, but you mentioned Paul Litton before also, and you know, you played with many European improvisers like Barry Guy and Augusti Fernandez, and like, how did you connect also to the European scene, and what's your view on I don't know, I always sense maybe this older generation of European musicians, they have a completely different improvisational strategy, I'll put it like that, than nowadays, like younger musicians. Of course, it's like one big global unity, but what was your experience playing with these elders? I mean,
I mean, in a way, I was lucky to be, I think, in the last generation that was finding that music before the internet. And so it takes on a little more weight. You know, I remember someone playing, like being at a party and someone played an LP copy of Topography of the Lungs, and just being like, it was that same feeling I had hearing Four and More for the first. It was just like, this is the most punk rock thing I've heard. And I met Paul pretty early on. I was super fascinated by Evan Parker. I still am.
Sure.
You know, like a bunch of players from that scene. And I was also fascinated by the trumpet players that were coming out of that scene, like out of the Berlin thing, like Axel.
Yeah.
Blew my mind. I was just talking with someone about this, like to hear Axel before there was YouTube was insane, because you could not figure out what he was doing.
I remember too. Yeah,
just see a video and it's like, okay, whatever. But that sort of stuff was just really fascinating to me. And I think the thing that I liked once I got to play with those guys and got to know them a little bit is that that older generation especially really had this attitude of like, they heard Coltrane, you know, when Coltrane was playing, and they realized rightly that they were never going to play that way. You know, like Evan Parker was super open about that. He's like, I heard Coltrane, I wanted to play like Coltrane, but I'm a British guy that studied botany. Like, I don't have the life experience that dude has. Like, I didn't live that life, so I have to figure out a way to play the way that I would play with my life. And I found that super inspiring, you know, because it's like, it's a beautiful thing to pay homage to someone like Coltrane or Miles Davis, but I always kind of intuitively knew that the best thing you can do to pay homage to that person is to do something as unique to yourself as they did, and like do it in as rigorous a way. Like it's more of an homage to Coltrane to like put that amount of energy into your own thing than to try and sound like Coltrane.
Sure.
And so I really was attracted to Evan and Paul and, you know, Paul Lovins and those people who just were like, we love this music, but we're trying to do what they did in our way, you know. And I think a lot of that came from Derek Bailey too, although I never got to meet him. And I think it's the thing that attracted me too to like Peter Evans when I met him at first. It's just like, yeah, here's a guy that can do anything, but he's choosing to put that energy into something that is completely his own thing and not, you know, he could be the next Wynton Marsalis. Like he could be
anyone,
straight ahead jazz superstar, but he's got a vision and he's following it. And that was really attractive to me. At the time I first started to hear those people, and I think in America there still was a lot of kind of hero worship in jazz. I think there's much less now, but it was still like very university based. Trumpet players sound like Clifford Brown, sax players sound like Coltrane, you know. And so this was kind of a different option for me. It fit better to me, at least.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, when I checked, I did this talk with so many guys from the UK scene, you know, with Barry Guy also, and
oh, cool.
You know, the improvised players, Mark Sanders and all these guys. And it's interesting to hear how different their development was. Like you said, you know, it's than in the States, you know, which is now it's different. I think nowadays it's really, I feel like a global, everyone is checking out everyone, at least those who are really into it. I mean, I'll put it like that. And so, which is nice, you know, you don't know whether a player is from New York or from Slovenia or from Norway or it's music in the end, which is cool, you know. It's
cool.
But I wanted to ask you about Peter also. Like I love those duos you guys did, and it's amazing that you know, you're kind of the same generation, like or he's a little bit younger, I think.
Yeah, he's younger than me.
Yeah, but conceptually, both of you guys are like doing your own thing, have your own voice.
Yeah,
and I really love that. And like, do you guys still have the duo? I mean, are you still planning to do something there?
No, I mean, it's never officially been ended. So, I mean, yeah, kind of, but I just don't ever see him anymore, you know, and he lives in the neighborhood and we don't cross paths anymore, unfortunately. I mean, I remember hearing him the first time it was this Butch Morris conduction of just trumpet players that Dave Douglas put together. And I remember hearing Peter and being like, oh man. And afterward, he just like came up and was like, you and I need to talk. Like we need to figure some stuff out. And it was great. Those early years, because neither of us were playing so much yet. And so we could just get together and freak out. And I learned a ton from playing with him, just trying to build up the strength to play with him, because he's got that, and that taught me a lot about my own playing and led me to play the way that I do now. And I started playing the amplifier partly because of playing with him, because it was like easier for me to keep up with the wall of sound that he was making, like if I did this. So I'm thankful for that too. And then, you know, it just our paths diverged a little bit, which is weird. I mean, I think we're both interested in new music, but he's playing a very different kind of new music than I am, but we're like still in this parallel world. But ultimately I think it's just timing. Like we haven't seen each other. We tried to make a second duo record. We recorded it. It was just kind of an awkward situation. The recording was, so I don't think it felt right to do it. And you know, now he's pretty composition driven. I'm doing mutual aid music stuff. It's like but yeah, it might be. I've been thinking about him a lot because I miss hanging out with him, and it might be nice to get together and, you know, try and kill each other on stage. It's like
10 years
see
later, yeah,
each other for an hour kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, just so that you know that you can greet the dishwasher fixing guy. Like, just I'll finish like slowly. Like what are your plans for the upcoming months? I mean, do you have some new upcoming projects? Are you planning to come to Europe as well? Like, what are the?
Yeah, right now I'm done touring for the year, which is really nice actually, because I'm not home that much, and you know, it's nice to be home with my wife and kind of feel like I actually live here. The next kind of stuff that I'm working on is there's going to be another Columbia Icefield record.
Really? Oh man.
Doing the writing on that and trying to figure out what that's actually going to be. I have a couple composition things that are coming out that I just finished tracking, and now I just need to mix them. And then the next time I come to Europe is I'm playing solo in Amsterdam in January, and then with this band Reghoster, which is a really great band from Switzerland that I've played with a couple tours, and they're really amazing. And playing in Portugal with Eddie Paz, the saxophonist, and Tom Rainey. He's got a band with the two of us. Beautiful. Yeah, and just trying to like, I'm in a weird place because my day job has, for all intents and purposes, ended, and I've never made a living as a musician. You know, I've had a job since I was 14, and now at 49, like I'm starting to figure out like how to be a musician, or whether I just need to find another job. And so it's a strange time. You know, it's like trying to find a way to do the work I want to do, which I feel really confident about all of a sudden, finally, you know, after all these years, while also navigating that, like, how do you make enough money to stay alive, pay the rent? And, you know, it's an interesting time, and I like it a lot. Like, it's an interesting challenge. I'm getting to do a lot of writing and writing essays and writing compositions and practice. You know, it's kind of the thing as a kid I always hoped I would end up doing. You know, it's like I'm somehow living a life where I get to write essays and write music and practice trumpet. So I'm just trying to enjoy it for as long as it lasts, you know. We'll see what comes of it. But, yeah.
Wow, man, sounds beautiful. I hope to catch you in Europe, Nate. Let me know. Drop me a line if we get together for a beer or whatever.
That would be great. That would be really great.
Or play one day. I mean, would love to.
Oh, even better.
Day,
yeah,
you know,
play together and have a beer. You can do both at once.
But man, thanks so much for, you know,
thank you,
sharing some of these thoughts, and beautiful to hear talk about.
Thanks for asking me. I've been a fan, so it was a great thing to get that email and that you wanted to do it. So I'm really happy.
Thanks, man. Stay strong.
Thank you. You too.
Ciao, Nate. Ciao.